Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome back to The Canadian Story. I'm joined once again today by the kind gentlemen over at Police on Guard, Mr. Clay Farnsworth and Chris VandenBos. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming back and being here. We're excited to have you back.
Thanks for having us again, Zach and David. Looking forward to bringing the Canadians more information regarding what's been happening with our court systems.
Couldn't have said it better, Clay. Thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So if you haven't listened to their last episode, I highly recommend it. I believe I titled it just simply Police on Guard, so it should be easy to find. But for the people who haven't listened to that episode but happen to be listening to this one, let's start once again with Mr. Farnsworth. Clay, please just detail a little bit about your background, and then we'll throw over to Chris as well to do the same.
Okay. I'm a 25-year veteran of the RCMP. I joined in 1980 prior to the Constitution, the Charter coming into effect in Canada. Did all of my service in Alberta, taking my retirement in 2005. The vast majority of my service was uniform and traffic duties, and joined Police on Guard as soon as my wonderful co-host down here, or my partner down here, put out the call looking for retired members that felt that the charter was being violated by all these mandates. So that's my policing background. Since then, I couldn't decide what I wanted to be when I grew up. But Chris, I'll let you explain Police on Guard and your background.
Yeah, so my name is VandenBos, and I'm one of the co-founders of Police on Guard. Police on Guard was started in December of 2020. It was in response to the Calgary incident where a young gentleman was arrested, hogtied, threatened to be tased, kneed, his skates cut off, thrown in the back of a police cruiser for not wearing a mask in an outdoor skating rink. It really hit me because I have young boys. They love hockey, and I remember through the pandemic thinking to myself, "Where's the science to back these sorts of mandates for outdoors wearing a mask?" And the seeming overreach by our government and by proxy the police moving forward in enforcing these mandates when the Charter very clearly stipulates what your freedoms and rights are within Canada. Now, myself, I've been a police officer since 2005, and now I find myself moving into a new career path. But that doesn't mean that I've forgotten my oath, and it doesn't mean that I don't still stand for it and believe strongly in it. And I think that Canadians need to stand behind officers that are standing for the Charter, because the Charter is about them. The reason a police officer takes an oath to uphold the Constitution and the Charter is to prevent things like what I just explained from happening, because the oath is there to protect their rights and freedoms, and it's not subject to the political ebbs and flows of the day-to-day government. It is there for everyone to adhere to, especially on a governmental level. And when officers were being asked to being asked to enforce mandates and violate their oath, we felt it was an untenable position. So we have moved forward with court applications to seek declaratory relief to get an answer to it. And at this point, it's yet to be seen how that will shake out. But what we can say is that everyone within Police on Guard are firm believers in the oath that they took, and they're firm believers in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and standing up for them on behalf of all Canadians.
So just to add to that, before you guys give us a quick question here, you got to remember I started policing prior to the Charter. So my policing career was very, to use the term rough would be an understatement, because every week we'd come in, there was a new ruling coming out of either the Superior Courts or Supreme Court or Court of Appeals within your province. And that was affecting how we could police based on the Charter. So we were constantly learning, but those of us who adopted our policing skills to the Charter soon became fans of it and realized it was going to make us better policemen, because we understood that people had rights and we had much stricter rules to follow in order to get our court convictions.
So we're this episode, we want to talk about something that's happened very recently, which is what happened to Chris Barber, who has now had a lot of his rights violated. Do one of you want to share with us, for those who don't know, who Chris Barber is, what happened, and kind of frame this discussion?
Sure, I'll take that. Chris Barber was one of the Freedom Convoy organizers. He wasn't at the beginning, but he fell into that position as the convoy grew. Chris is a trucker from Swift Current, Saskatchewan. His trucking company is CB Trucking. I mean, it's no secret about that. You can find it online. And Chris worked along with Tamara Leach and many of the other people at Convoy Central in Ottawa. And Chris, because of that, was one of the ones charged in Ottawa with Tamara Leach. He lives with horrendous release conditions that I've never seen with the type of charges that he has. And Chris, if anything, is a down-to-earth, hardworking Canadian who built his company up from scratch and suddenly found himself having to do things against his will in order to maintain his company vis-a-vis the vaccine to cross the border. And part of that was when Chris was charged, there were actions taken against him. Now, I'm going to let Chris explain a little bit more. I know his background out there, but Chris marched with Chris, Chris and Chris show here. He got to know Chris Barber because Chris V was one of our Police on Guard members on the scene, boots on the ground. Police on Guard was there for 11 days, Chris. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're muted, buddy.
Well, longer than that, actually, almost the entire duration. There was a gap of 3 days in between, but we were there pretty much for the entirety of it. Yeah. Yeah.
So go ahead and tell Chris's role in Ottawa. You were there. I wasn't. I just happened to know Chris. So.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a unique thing. I mean, to not have it go on too long in terms of an explanation, I'll just quickly give the background. Like, we were there in an observation role. We saw what was going on in terms of the convoy coming together, and we wanted to go there to witness what was the Canadian response. What were the people there in attendance like? Was it violent? Was it not violent? What sorts of activities were people engaging in? And right from day one, because I was there on actually the day before everyone arrived, I started seeing the coming together of Canadians of all walks of life, and people were just exhibiting so much kindness in terms of, like, you know, cleaning up storefronts, shoveling snow, cleaning up garbage off the streets, feeding the homeless, giving warm clothes to the homeless, bringing them into makeshift shelters to give them a place of comfort. And through my observations and being there, I ran into Chris Barber, and, you know, knowing who he was because he was getting some media attention for his involvement, I started having conversations with him. And, you know, I wanted to get a sense of, what are your ambitions with this? What are your intentions surrounding this? And basically what he let me know was that he had received the medical interventions that were being mandated. It was certainly not about anything surrounding freedom of choice. It was about the fact that freedom of choice is being removed, and the ability to conduct oneself as a trucker was being limited to those who had received this mandatory inoculation. And I mean, there's a lot more to what's behind it than that, but it all centered around the rights and the freedoms of the people. So when the convoy was moving on, there was the Jericho March, which was a group of Christ followers that got together to just come together in prayer and unity and in peace and harmony, to walk around Parliament and pray for change, to pray for a moving of the Holy Spirit through the country, to expose the lies and corruptions that was going on. And Chris came out and he joined, and I wasn't aware that he was going to, but he linked up with me right away, and we had the opportunity to march around Parliament and chat further. And the impression that I got from him throughout my interactions was exactly as Clay laid out. Like, there was no extremist ideologies. There was no alt-right ideation. There was none of that. There was just simply a deep care and concern for the trajectory of this country and wanting to go about seeking a peaceful and democratic change. Now, we all know how the media categorized it. We all know the way the government categorized it, but there was zero. I mean, we come from a policing background, Clay and I, and the other members of Police on Guard. Evidence is key. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. Yet with the categorization of the convoy, there was so much ad hominem being placed on those involved and what was going on there. And through the media, a complete misrepresentation of what was going on there, that it created in the public that might not otherwise know because they weren't there, this opinion or this belief that it was extreme and it was violent and it was an insurrection and it was all these things. I witnessed none of that. You're going to tell me that the Chinese families that I sat and chatted with and broke bread with and spoke with for hours who came from communist China were alt-right extremists? No, they did not want to see Canada going down the same path as what they witnessed in their previous homeland. That's why they came here. And they were there to stand for that. And Chris was a part of the leading of that charge, so to say, of bringing people together that had those concerns to do it in a way that they could be heard and do it peacefully. And it's a shame what ended up happening in the end result, because I think a lot of Canadians still might not know exactly what went on there, because it certainly was not as media and government advertised.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that we've tried to do on the show, because we've brought on a number of people who were involved and a number of people who were there. And that's one of the things we've tried to do. We've tried to communicate that, hey, it might not have been the way the media portrayed it. So it sounds to me, I've had zero correspondence with him, but it sounds to me that Chris, at the very least, gives off the impression as being, a stand-up dude. What are his charges? Let's maybe start there.
That I know that his charges stem along the same as Tamara Leach. Chris and I have never discussed his charges. I mean, he's under strict talking guidelines by his lawyers. Although they're public knowledge, we've never discussed that. I know mischief is one of them. I think conspiracy to commit mischief is another one. So they're basically, from the days when I was a policeman, they'd have been nothing more than a person doing a promise to appear release at the detachment, kicking the person out, giving them 6 weeks notice to find a lawyer, and we'll see you in court. None of this stuff where you're living under these strict conditions of who you can associate, when you can do this, when you can do that, reporting procedures and all that type of stuff fall into this. And I should have probably spoke to Chris about his charges. I mean, that's just something that Chris and I don't bring up when we're talking, because quite frankly, Chris is worried. He has seen the way the courts have reacted to this stuff, and this man is worried. And I don't blame him, because can we trust the courts?
Okay, well, let's maybe start with this then. Why do you think he is being handled so heavily? Why is the stipulations that he's being required to live on right now so heavy-handed?
I can speak from only my opinion, from my vantage point, and I can say that it's politically motivated. From my perspective, it seems to be 100% politically motivated, and it's not just Chris Barber and Tamara Leach that has been, subject to this punitive punishment. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up this point. We live in Canada. We have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We have the ability to enjoy the freedoms that this land guarantees, because the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is at the very top. These are rights that are, given to us. They are God-given inalienable rights that are within the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And in order to go against the Charter, you have to go through the Oakes test, which is a 4-part test to make sure that whatever mandates or measures you're putting in place that might be in violation of the Charter are strictly adhered to, that you go through the test to make sure through the courts that this is done properly. And you know what, I want to bring up another point, if I may. Not just Chris Barber, but how do Canadians feel about the fact that there were pastors thrown in prison and held for months on end for holding service? Now, let's talk about the legalities of this. Again, my opinion from my vantage point, but Section 176 of the Criminal Code is obstructing or violence to or arrest of officiating clergymen. Now, it talks about what is within that. And this is not necessarily related to Chris, but this is just a further extension of the political, seemingly oppressive environment that's been created, because here you've had pastors being arrested, where it says in Section 176, every person is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for a term of not more than 2 years, or is guilty of an offense punishable on summary conviction who, by threats of force, unlawfully obstructs or prevents or endeavors to obstruct or prevent an efficient from celebrating a religious or spiritual service or performing any other function in connection with their calling, or knowing that an officiant is about to perform or is on their way to perform or is returning from the performance of any of the duties or functions mentioned in paragraph A. So now we talk about Chris Barber, we talk about pastors, and we talk about what went on through COVID in Canada. We see that, police officers were cutting lines on hi-hos, tractors out in Alberta. We see that Tamara Leach was returned on a warrant for counseling to commit mischief and brought in shackles, including her legs, on a plane across Canada where they returned, which has never happened in Canadian history. We saw pastors thrown in prison on their way back from conducting service, which is, in my view, a violation of Section 176 of the Criminal Code. And where are the stopgaps? The stopgaps should be the rule of law, the Criminal Code, and most notably the Charter. And now we're seeing with Chris, as mentioned, what he's gone through. He had his rights violated in a sense that, we haven't gone in depth into this, but I'm sure we should and we will. He had his private communications divulged to the media as a part of disclosure in his criminal defense. Now, we saw charges all through our careers get thrown out if the charter or charges were thrown out if the charter was violated. And now here we have very clear, egregious violations of the Charter and the Criminal Code of Canada. And it seemingly is radio silence. Are Canadians okay with this? Is this the direction Canada wants our country to go? Because we see our Prime Minister standing up at the pulpit when asked direct questions surrounding issues such as this, not answer, and revert back to his plans for climate reaction and change in law and policy and all this stuff, and never answers the question. We as Canadians deserve better. We deserve answers, and we deserve the rule of law and our charter to be maintained. And in Chris's case, that's another clear example of just how wrong it went.
Okay,
Zach, going back to your question there as to what his charges are, I took the time to look them up while Chris was talking here. So the main section, like I said, was mischief, which is section 430 under the Criminal Code. And it basically comes down to everyone commits mischief who willfully destroys or damages property, renders property dangerous, useless, or inoperative or ineffective, obstructs, interrupts, or interferes with the lawful use, enjoyment, and operation of property, or obstructs, interrupts, and interferes with a person in the lawful use, enjoyment, and operation of that property. Pretty, in my experience, I can tell you that it was never one that was used an awful lot because it just didn't happen type thing. And the two sections that he's charged with are counseling to commit an offense to disobey a court order and counseling to commit an offense to obstruct the police. So that's meaning he's going out and actually counseling people to commit an offense. Now, something that we have to remember, and Canadians have lost sight of this, especially with the Rouleau inquiry and the government, because the government took and twisted everything within what had happened at that Freedom Convoy. Canadians need to understand that. Very early, that convoy was deemed legal. That was deemed legal by a Superior Court judge in Ontario, that it was a lawful legal protest. The media and the government turned that around to call it an insurrection and what's the word I'm looking for, Chris? It was an insurrection against the government, and they were terrorists. That was how they were able to implement the EA, spin the words to get the EA to drop, and then that allowed, by using the word terrorists, allowed the banks to come in. So the government and the media was able to take everything and spin it, even though there was a legal court ruling that protest, the Freedom Convoy, was deemed legal. And for some unknown reason, the media has dropped that. We have forgotten that, and the Canadian people may or may not know that.
I didn't know that. But
we need to shout that from the rooftops, that was deemed to be a legal protest about day 3 or day 4.
Okay, so
can I just add something to that too? Because I think it's important Canadians understand the gaslighting that is going on here, and it's all about wordplay. So in order to justify the facets that they moved forward with under the Emergency Act, they classified trucks as weapons, and they classified honking and emissions as violence. Okay, so that's an important part to touch on here, because in order to justify it, they use trucks and honking and emissions as their impetus to bring this forward. So when Sobeys gets a delivery, it's delivered by a weapon. And when it's running the truck outside to keep the refrigerators going, that's violence. Okay. But because this was a movement of people coming together to oppose the measures of the government, that was then weaponized and the definitions were skewed. That's important.
Okay, that's very important. I have so many things I want to get to, but I want to take a very short detour because Clay, you said mischief is the destruction of property, or I mean, you'll do a better job of rereading it because I'm sure you were reading it.
I'll bring that back up.
Here's a question: are police officers subject to the criminal code?
Of course they are.
Okay, so when police officers cut brake lines, cut coolant lines, et cetera, that is destruction of property, is it not?
You bet it is. Are you talking about the excavators at Coots?
I am. And I know that this is a detour from the conversation that we're trying to have, but what the hell?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The thought police. They thought they might be used, so let's vandalize them and take them out of commission. There was absolutely no evidence that those machines were going to be used. And you talk about the thought police, because that's what I like to refer to it now. Go back to listening to the inquiry and listen to the actual evidence that Keith Wilson and Brendan Miller were able to bring to the forefront, especially Brendan. Absolutely phenomenal job on getting the clerk of the Privy Council and the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister to make admissions regarding the EA and Section 2 of the Emergency Act, where they changed the definition because they didn't think it was proper. So we have CSIS coming out saying that no, Section 2 has not been met. We have the chief of police from Ottawa. We have the commissioner of the RCMP, and we have the chief from OPP coming out saying we have not used all the tools in our tool belt. There is no violence, but we have senior counsel to government, not legal counsel, but senior positions, the Privy Council and the National Security Advisor, saying that we're not comfortable with the definition of the EA, so we're going to change it. We're just going to change it. So now it's suddenly going to meet the Prime Minister's whim to drop the EA.
EA
that
being
pretty well happened in a nutshell.
Act.
So just to summarize for people who maybe don't understand the language that you guys are using to the same degree, because you guys are obviously experts in law enforcement, essentially what happened was the government ignored the advice of the experts on law and order, who are saying that they did not believe this was violent or that it was cause for invoking the Emergencies Act. And they changed the law in order to justify enacting the Emergencies Act. And what did they change the law to do? They said trucks are weapons and that honking and CO2 emissions are violence. Like, I want everyone to be very clear on this. They've now changed the Emergencies Act to say that emissions, that CO2 emissions, that vehicle emissions are violence. Pay attention to this.
They didn't per se change the act. What they did was changed their definitions of the elements of the charge, would probably be the best way to put it.
That's a good clarification, Clay.
Yeah. Thank you. So they haven't changed the act, but they have now interpreted the act. They've now interpreted the act. They are now saying that emissions are violence. Right?
They changed the definitions to suit their purpose, would be the best way to put it.
I think I have a fun way to put this into perspective. The Emergencies Act is supposed to be invoked on the basis of threats to Canada's national security and sovereignty. One of the interpretations that they changed was honking. So in theory, If you drive around your block and honk too much, you are threatening the national security of your country. And that was the bar that they set for that.
And for those of you listening who might think that that's a stretch and how silly to go out on that limb, it happened. I don't know if you saw the video of the 4'10" tall, 105-pound elderly gentleman flying 2 Canadian flags on his van and gave a honk in support of people that were protesting. He was pulled over and violently arrested. Okay, for honking his horn. An elderly gentleman who my right leg is bigger than, violently arrested.
And that happened across Canada, gentlemen. That I know of a police officer who took his retirement from CPS because of this, and he was charged for honking his horn at a rally in Calgary.
So
the amazing thing is, let me finish this one for you, David, because this one's going to curl your hair. Okay. Shortly thereafter, that bylaw come into effect that you couldn't honk your horn for a freedom rally in Calgary. They rescinded that bylaw to allow you to honk horns for the Flames playoffs.
Yeah, I've been saying this in a number of meetings recently, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this, but we don't live in a free country, folks. The country is no longer free. Like, let's not kid ourselves here. And a lot of people talk about the law, and I appreciate that we're talking about the law here, and we're showing how the law is being manipulated. But let's be honest, the law is made by humans. And we now have humans in power who are simply interpreting the law any way they want. They're calling honking and admissions violence. They're violently arresting people for honking. We don't live in a free society anymore, and we need to get it back. Like, we can't pretend like, oh, we're in a free society, but things are headed in the wrong direction. No, things have already gone in the wrong direction. We have to go back. We have to retake these rights because they are no longer ours.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say to that point, I mean, it doesn't matter what side of this debate you are on in terms of whether or not you agree with the Freedom Convoy. That's irrelevant. What is important, what is the center of this entire issue is your right to assemble and protest. Let's say it's a different subject. Let's say it's a different reason for coming together to protest that I might disagree with or not align with or affiliate with. That right still affords you the ability to do that. And if you allow for the usurpation of that on one ideological issue, because you disagree with the reasons for the formation of the peaceful assembly, then you're essentially extending that to all areas that might lead to a peaceful assembly and protest. It is the disintegration of the very fiber of this country that holds it together, that you can disagree. The whole issue of tolerance has been bastardized. Tolerance is not about swallowing somebody else's ideologies. It's about respectfully disagreeing and still being able to cohabitate with these other people that might disagree with you. Because that is their right, and that is your right to disagree. It is their right to disagree with me about the Freedom Convoy. It is their right to disagree with me about mandates. It is your right to disagree with me about faith. Whatever the case might be, that is your right. And it is also your right to go out in the street with others that agree with you and have a peaceful assembly and protest and let your voice be heard without getting butt stroked by a rifle, have your windows smashed out, be dragged to the ground, be kicked, be kneed, be arrested, be chained and shackled and dragged across the country. If this is Canada and we want it to stay Canada, then wake the heck up and start standing for the freedoms before they're gone.
So that what people don't realize is that this ruling is extremely dangerous, and exactly where Chris was going is this now means that any protest in the future that the Prime Minister or the government does not like, the rules for the EA have been changed because there's a decision on it now, so he can drop the EA at the whim. Because the requirements for the Emergencies Act was never met, but yet we've allowed it to go through. So now if we're having a protest on whatever it is and the government doesn't like it, they can invoke the Emergencies Act and start seizing bank accounts and seizing everything else that goes along with it. Now, the funny thing that Rouleau did, now this one blows my mind.
Oh yeah, for those who don't know, Rouleau, many will, but Rouleau is the judge that was overseeing the government commission that was looking at the use of the Emergencies Act. So to put that simply, the government had an inquiry, because right now the Liberals are in a minority, an inquiry on whether or not the Emergencies Act was used justly. And Rouleau was the judge in charge of that inquiry.
And they have to, by law, have that inquiry. And thank you, David, because I read it so much that that's how I refer to him, as Rouleau, right? So Rouleau, in his infinite wisdom, felt that it was okay for the government to seize the bank accounts, even though there were joint bank accounts. So you were one of the people at the protest or at the Freedom Convoy. I hate using the word protest because it was a Freedom Convoy. And your wife is at home shopping, but your name come up on the black watch list that the government had created because you were there or you had contributed to it. Now your wife goes to buy groceries. She's in line. She can't get her groceries. She's standing there with your 2 or 3 kids and a little one on her hip, and the debit card doesn't work. The credit card doesn't work. She tries another one, and finally your wife leaves the grocery store in tears, totally embarrassed, leaving the groceries there. But that was okay. But taking the insurance off of the vehicles was not okay. How does he make that leap? How does he make the leap? It's quite simple in my mind. I can seize the bank accounts and inconvenience you because you're going to have to go home then, or your family's going to starve. But if I take the insurance off your vehicles, you can't leave. So my evil little mind goes to, let's play one against the other here. Because if you can justify in your mind, Justice Rouleau can justify in his mind, and when you read some of his comments, he said a person may come to a different conclusion on this evidence. Well, duh, you bet I would have. Okay. But if you try to follow his train of thought that it's okay to starve out a family, but we got to send you home to do it, there's something else at play there. I just can't justify in how he can come to that conclusion that one is okay and one isn't.
Right. Okay. Let's recenter ourselves around Chris Barber.
Yeah, you bet.
So I promised a short tangent and off we went, which is great. Okay. So Chris Barber. So he was there. He was an organizer. Yep. He has had these charges brought against him. What has happened since the laying of those charges?
Okay. Part of that was when Chris was arrested, his electronic devices were seized by the police. So through the investigation.
Pause. Is that standard?
In this scenario, I would think that it would be a standard procedure that they would seize his electronic devices, especially when they're going after the 2 charges counseling to commit an offense. They're going to have to be able to prove that he was actually counseling others to commit that offense. So therefore, they're going to have to seize his communication devices. Okay. So once they do that and they go through his devices, mostly his cell phone, they pull up, and I'm trying to go by memory, and Police on Guard will be releasing an interview with Keith Wilson and Chris Barber very soon. It'll be up on our website. I believe it was 1,740. So argument's sakes, we call it 1,700 pages of text messages from Chris's cell phone between his wife, his ex-wife, his children, his family, and other family members, his business, his clients, other drivers that he has hired. But the worst part of this whole thing is that the messages were also included private text messages between Chris and his lawyers. Now, the rule of law is you do not release solicitor-client privileged information. That is just a no-no. So the police would have had this information. They would have had to provide it to the Crown as part of their investigation. And the Crown, through, I believe, Chris, correct me if I'm going back in years. I believe the disclosure case was Stinchcombe that come out of the Supreme Court of Canada back in the mid-90s, I believe, where Crown had to disclose to defense the evidence that they had in order for the defense to launch a proper case in court in defense of their client. So somewhere along the way, and it wouldn't have been the defense that would have released this to the media, it would have been the Crown or it would have been the police, released Chris's private text messages to the media. Chris had no idea this was happening until he watched it on CTV News. So you want to talk about a breach of the rule of law? There you go. So
okay, so
it's egregious.
We don't know yet if it was the Crown who released this or if it was the police. We assume, although it is still a possibility, that the defense could have released it, but there would be no good reason for the defense to do that. Either way, because it is a conversation, specifically the text messages between Chris and his lawyers, that is a violation of what do you call it? I don't have the words at the top of my head.
Solicitor-client privilege.
Yeah, that's what I'm going privilege. For. Okay, so let's just clear this up here. That is a breaking of the law, yes?
Yes.
Okay. What happens? What is the precedent? What has happened in other court cases where some party within that case breaks the law in the during the course of, I don't know if they're probably not in trial yet, but during the course of the charge to conviction? What happens when someone breaks the law?
I'll let Chris go to that one because his experience is more current than mine.
Well, anytime there's a charter breach violation or a violation of the law by those that are meant to uphold it, typically in my experience and my observations throughout my career, the charges were tossed. You know, if you, for instance, were to effect an arrest on somebody, let's say for domestic violence, and you decide that you're going to take the law into your own hands and effecting that arrest and start laying the boots to the subject that's responsible, and it gets to court, and the Crown sees the damage done, and the defense says, you know what, the officer beat the crap out of my client. You know, like he didn't effect an arrest and there was no escalation by my client or whatever the case may be. You know, his rights were violated. More times than not, the case would be thrown out. So in this particular case where you had a breach of privacy, you had a breach of solicitor-client privilege, I can't see how they can move forward with this in my view. I don't see how there would be justification when there was such an egregious overreach and a lack of jurisprudence. But yet here we are. You know, I've scratched my head over a lot these last 3 years because the historical norms that I became accustomed to were tossed out the window.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe it's important to ask the question, how recently did this happen? So today we are March 1st. How recently were these text messages released?
They were released prior to the inquiry with Chris's charges. It's just come to light that they're seeking dismissal on charter violations. So it happened sometime after his release and before the inquiry. Again, because of certain things that are happening within the courts that we're only privy to so much information. So that's the only timeline I can provide.
So just clear that up as much as you can.
Ask yourself this question though, Zach, before we go further with this. Even if we're not going to go down the violation of Chris's rights around clients, solicitor privilege here, what purpose does the government gain? And I'll use the term government because we don't know if it was a Crown, we don't know if it was a police. What did they gain by releasing a person's private information around his family?
Well, yeah, that's a very fascinating question, isn't it? The first thing that's most easy to grasp at is it seems to me that they are likely trying to destroy his character in some way. And that's just like my first my first impression. But the question then becomes, if that is what they are trying to do, why are they trying to do that? Do they feel that they don't have the case? Do you think here's the reverse psychology of it? Do you think they want it tossed out so that they don't have to suffer the embarrassment of it going to trial and the Crown losing?
I think it's character assassination in its finest by the government. The same thing with Tamara Leach. That's why they're trying to do this. They're trying to build their cases and paint these organizers or the people that step forward to try to get the government to come to the table. That's what they were there for. They weren't there for an insurrection. Let's sit down and talk. This could have all been prevented with a simple cup of coffee and a donut at a boardroom table. And, pick your best three and let's have a discussion and we'll go from there. And yeah, we can't have it, if the prime minister would have sent or come out himself and went out there and say, hey, look, I can't talk to 50,000 people. So who do you want to represent you? Have your stuff ready to go at 1:00 tomorrow. I'm buying KFC and we're going to sit down at the boardroom. We're going to hash this out. You may not like the answers, but I'm here to listen. That's all that anybody in Canada wanted, was to have our voices heard.
It is so absolutely arrogant. It is so absolutely arrogant that didn't happen. Even if the result of that meeting was, I'm not going to give you what you want, the fact that the meeting was never even entertained by anyone within this current government is just absolute narcissistic insanity. The idea that I don't even with everything going on in Ottawa and the entire country fired up, he didn't even have to come to the table because who cares about those people? It is just mind-boggling, the arrogance that decision requires.
Well, then that takes us right back to the inquiry, where Commissioner Lucky's evidence was that they had not exhausted all of their avenues and there was a plan in place. The Prime Minister in his evidence said, I never looked at the plan. The security advisor to the Prime Minister said, we didn't look at it. We didn't think it was going to be any good, so we didn't need to look at it. Well, so you're basing that on what? Number one, the advisor to the national security has no policing background, none whatsoever. She's not a policeman. So you tell me how she can see that the commissioner of the RCMP's plan, whether you like Brenda Lucky or not, doesn't matter. She was the person in charge of the RCMP at the time and still is for another 17 days, I believe, before her retirement kicks in. Doesn't matter. She had a plan in place. And we know from Keith Wilson's evidence that they were clearing trucks out. So the plan between the police and the frontline organizers was coming together. But the security advisor decided, no, we don't need to hear this plan. And the Prime Minister says, I never even read it. So we just dropped the EA. And we have a problem here with procedure.
And one more thing to add, too. In order to justify the EA, reasonable grounds is one of the things that is often used in policing and required in policing to move forward with a charge or to justify one's actions. And reasonable grounds can be defined as a set of facts or circumstances that would lead an ordinary or cautious, prudent person to believe that something is, in fact, what it seems. So if that's the case, when they were negotiating with the police and with the city of Ottawa and government, and it was asked that they move trucks and they complied, would reasonable and probable grounds would that still be met to have people believe that they are insurrectionists and occupying? Further, we move on. There was an emergency injunction to stop the honking of horns. I didn't hear a single horn honk the entirety of that injunction while it was in place. Does that seem like the actions and behavior of somebody who is not following the rule of law and what was being negotiated or being stipulated by judges? I mean, you go down the list, it's very obvious to me, having been there and seeing the way it was categorized, as I mentioned earlier, that there was a great disparity between what was being said by the government and the media versus what was actually happening live time in Ottawa. And, one of the things I do want to add too, when it comes to this prime minister, if you want to know who somebody is, let them tell you. He said before he was even prime minister that he had a deep admiration for China's basic dictatorship for their ability to get things done on a dime. Now, he acted, in my view, exactly as somebody in a dictator role would, because he did not adhere to the rule of law. He did what he wanted to do based on what his feelings and opinions and what he believed his power to be. And he figured, well, we'll just let things shake out afterwards. I'm going to do what I want to do. Who was the one being unreasonable there? The government or those in Ottawa?
And I think what we're coming to with this entire conversation, and the reason that all of this sets such an important precedent within our country, is because I think we are grappling with this great big question right now, which is government required to be accountable? And that is the Freedom Convoy, that is the emergency authorization, or the EA, that is COVID policy, that is lockdowns, that is the freezing of bank accounts, that is all these things that we have seen, that we are arguing about whether or not it was justified. But the overarching question that Canada has on the table right now is the government required to be accountable? And this throws back to what David was saying at the beginning of the conversation. If they are not required to be accountable, we aren't in a free country. And that's why this is an important precedent.
One of the parts of that Chris talked about earlier with the Oakes test in Section 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is the government must demonstrably justify any of their actions in order to supersede the rights given by the Charter. I have yet to see the government step to the plate and justify any of their actions. Any of their actions. It hasn't been done. Not to the level, not even close to the level that the Supreme Court ruled in the Oakes test. So we have serious violations of the Charter, and people need to understand that this is a very slippery slope for the government and for the people, because if we do not get the courts to wake up to this, and we haven't been seeing that, then let's get rid of the Constitution and the Charter, because we have nothing in Canada anymore. Our rights are gone. It's that simple.
It's alarming. It's alarming because the Canada that we all thought we lived in seemingly just got shaken off its axis the last 3 years, and a lot's been exposed, but now it's up to the people. It comes down to that. It's not up to, if you're looking for a political savior, you might get gray and pass before you find it. It has always been in public pressure that things change, that the needle moves. And again, it doesn't matter what side you stand on the argument of whether or not you like the convoy or Chris Barber. It has everything to do with the stopgaps put in place to prevent overreach by your government to quash your charter rights. And if you don't like that, if you don't agree with that, if you don't appreciate your rights, then maybe you're happy with the direction this country's going. But I can tell you, historically speaking and based on precedent, that's not the way it has run or should run. And if we don't stand up as a nation and demand that it be adhered to, I fear where Canada will be in 5 to 10 years.
And I know you gentlemen just finished an interview with and in fact, I was in Edmonton last week and met with him. Phenomenal gentleman. And I don't know if is your video out yet?
Yeah, we published it on.
Okay, so I can drop his name then.
Yeah,
I wasn't going to. I mean, there is a policeman's policeman, and I have grave concerns when we have policemen who take an oath to the Charter, and they simply attend a rally to see what is happening. I mean, that's what policemen do. We investigate. Chris will back that up 7 ways to Sunday, that we will attend things to see with our own eyes, to gather that evidence if we're going to be the investigator in that case. So we have policemen attending a rally to see what is truthful not what the media is telling them, but what is truthful, and then loses his career over attending. Now, as a person that would be living in that jurisdiction or with that city or with that whatever police force it is, if my police force was firing people for standing up for the Constitution and the Charter in which they took the oath to protect, which means they're there to protect me, and the people who actually investigate it and attend the scenes to do this are being the ones that are fired, I have a huge problem with that. And like I said the other night when I was doing another live stream with Shadow Davis, when I could get in a car, I could be smashed to no end, be drunk as a skunk, and run into a family and kill them all. I'll be suspended with pay. But attend a rally and defend your charter, you're suspended without pay? Canadian people need to understand there's a huge, huge problem there. And then these officers, on top of that, their legal defense comes from their unions, which is paid for, their legal lawyers are paid for or dictated to by their chief. How do you think that they are going to rule against these officers? We already know that one, don't we, Chris?
Well, it's kangaroo court because these charges are heard within their own police services. So, when you're charged with a criminal offense, you have a right to a fair trial, right, by a jury of your peers. When you're charged in the Police Services Act, you're tried by those who are charging you. So, does that sound like a... What's that?
That's insane.
Right. And then if you feel that you have been improperly processed or treated through that whole system, you can't sue because of labor laws. You have a union. It has to be handled by the union who breaks bread with the chiefs and deputy chiefs. So really what's been created, and I've heard the advocation for the charter to apply to police as well, because in most instances it does not. Maybe that's the first step, because a lot of officers, and I speak to a lot of them, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot from across Canada. And the ones that are in agreement, they don't want to step up and put their neck out because they know the second they do, it'll be cut off. So what do we want from our police people? Do we want our police to stand for the charter and for the people and to protect them because we are that line in the sand? Or do we want to offer the police up as sacrificial lambs so they cannot do what they took an oath to do?
I think that's a great, we're almost at an hour, and that's probably the perfect place to end it, is to ask that question. What is Canada? Well, right now, we're not a free nation. We have kangaroo courts attacking our police officers and basically metaphorically beheading them for supporting the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. What could we be? We could be a country that values these things. And the way that we could be that is if we would just wake up to the fact that we need to get involved. We need to change this. People like Police on Guard, Take Back Alberta, other groups across this country are trying, but we can't do it without you folks. There's no path forward if you don't get involved. We can work as hard as we want, but it won't matter.
Yeah.
And what should Canada be? It should be the place our ancestors gave us, a place of religious freedom, where our pastors are not put in jail, no matter what they're doing in terms of like their church services. They should be able to hold church services. It's in the criminal code. Our police officers should be able to defend the Charter of Rights and Freedoms without having their superiors suspend them without pay, when criminals are not being suspended without pay. And I think what else should we be? We should be a people who are willing to fight for our rights, because if we don't fight for them, nobody will.
No. And what the government taketh, they won't give back. Once we lose the rights, we're going to have to fight to get them back. There's no, we're sorry, we'll give it. Yeah, no, it doesn't happen that way. So, and, I just want to end on this note that there has been some rumors that Police on Guard is controlled opposition. We want to quell that. I can tell you right now that I spent over 4 years as a member representative in the RCMP representing members before we had unions. And if anything, I was anything but controllable or quiet when it come to taking on senior management, when it come to their stories to the media or to the press or to government. And so at the helm of Police on Guard, I can tell you right now that all of our members on the board, there is no finer people that I have ever served with, nobody with more integrity, and nobody with more courage to come out and defend the charter. Every one of us on the board of directors of Police on Guard does it because we truly believe our charter has been trampled upon. We have no gain from this, no personal gain. We are not controlled by any outside forces. And it has cost every one of us personally a huge amount in our social lives, our personal lives with family. So anybody who thinks that we're controlled, come and find me. I love my alley, and we'll do it the old-fashioned way.
Well said, Clay. I mean, just to finish on this point, on that point, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. I don't know if I knew what I was getting myself into when I stuck my neck out. But would I do it again? Yeah. I've not taken a dime, but I've put a lot of my own dimes into this because I believe in it that much. And I just hope as we move along that more Canadians will get behind us and more officers will remember that it's worth standing up for your oath, because to me, my integrity can't be bought. And I just hope that people find that same moral fabric within themselves, not to be, grandstanding or putting myself above anybody else. But if we could all just find that in ourselves to stand up for what we know to be right and to demand that our government do the same, I think we'll find ourselves in a better position.
Yeah, I could have quite easily stayed in my rocking chair on the deck with a good 18-year-old scotch and a cigar, but there had to be a calling for me to come out of and do this. So this is a hill that every one of us on our board of directors will die on, is to defend our charter. And I couldn't work with finer people than those that I've come across in Police on Guard.
Well, gentlemen,
thank you guys for coming on. Go ahead, Zach. Sorry.
No, I was just going to thank you, gentlemen. I respect you both very, very deeply, and I respect what you're doing even deeper. And I appreciate guys like you being in our corner. And the movement to keep Canada free is better for people like you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.